When I started working in the Children and Teens department about 9 years ago, the graphic novel section consisted of one bookshelf. Today, nearly 3 bookcases are devoted to graphics. This is a reflection of the growing popularity of graphics in this country and a testament to adults' acceptance of graphics as viable literature for children and teens. And for themselves, sales of P&P's adult graphics have doubled over the past 5 years. But many of us are still learning to appreciate the scope of graphics. Sure, they can be entertaining, but graphics also build literacy skills for beginning readers, introduce new concepts to older readers, and like any good literature, transport readers of all ages to another time or place, or offer a different perspective. This panel is the first in a series covering a variety of literary topics. The next panel, Picture Books Through the Ages and for All Ages, is on Sunday, May 19th at 5 p.m. And we're planning another graphic novel panel in September. I hope you'll join us. Thanks in large part to the panelists here tonight, readers can enjoy growing up with graphics. I'll introduce the panelists in alphabetical order, which, as luck would have it, also is in chronological order, from early readers to adult books. Eleanor Davis is a renowned graphic artist and illustrator whose work has been included in notable literary comic anthologies. Her 2008 tune, Easy Reader Stinky, won an ALI Geisel honor and uses a mix of humor and creative storytelling that makes the book entertaining and useful as a learning tool. Eleanor further demonstrated her insight into both genre and audience in her 2009 middle grade graphic adventure, The Secret Science Alliance and the Copycat Crook, a collaborative effort with her husband. Nathan Hale is an accomplished graphic artist for middle grade readers. He's the illustrator of the 2 popular fractured fairy tale narratives, Rapunzel's Revenge and Calamity Jack. His most recent series, Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales, uses a unique blend of humor and history to tell the story of early America. It is an intriguing and effective way to frame the historical narrative, and the next installment in the series will be out later this year. Andrés Vera Martínez is an artist whose graphics have appealed to a range of ages. He's created comics and illustrations for several publishers, CBS Showtime, and the New York Times. His most recent work, Little White Duck, is a collaborative graphic novel based on the childhood memories of his wife, Na Liu. The intricate art evokes the dreamlike nostalgia of memory without blurring the content of the stories. Mark Siegel is a graphic artist and editorial director at First Second Books, which publishes graphic novels for all ages. Along with his wife, Sienna Siegel, he created a middle-grade graphic memoir to dance, a ballerina's graphic novel. His most recent graphic, Sailor Twain, is for adults. It's a beautiful and evocative historical love story entrenched in traditional mermaid mythology. As an editor, he's helped create graphics for all ages and audiences, including the Prince Award-winning American-Born Chinese. And he has insights into the creation of graphic novels from both the artistic and editorial perspectives. Michael Cavna is a comic artist and the author of the popular comic Riffs blog at the Washington Post. As a journalist, he's interviewed some of the top names in the comics world. He began working professionally at age 12 and has drawn for numerous syndicates and national publications. Michael was a judge for the 2013 Will Eisner Comic Industry Awards. His personal knowledge of the genre, as well as his larger perspective as a journalist, make him uniquely placed to be our moderator tonight. And now, please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Thank you, Heidi, very much. And if any point you can't hear, please let us know. And will we be passing this mic around, or have a mic? You got it. Okay, great. Thank you all for coming out. With each step, Heidi's been letting us know this is the first this and the first that and the first bright lights, and so I thank you for bearing with us. As Heidi said, my origin stories, I started cartooning professionally when I was 12, and I was lucky enough, tonight we'll probably touch on people who, educators, teachers who just adults who don't get graphic novels as serious literature, and I was lucky enough to have a mom who is an artist, saw art, literature, film, comics, all this as seamless things. So she, when I was 12, marched into the Northern California local paper and said, "You need to publish my son's comics," and the editor looked at it and said, "You're right, yes I do." And so I've tried, and my whole life, whenever I would try something else other than comics, I felt like Al Pacino and The Godfather, they would pull me back in. And so that's my story. The reason I mention that is because I felt fortunate, but I have a daughter who's 13 going on 18 in terms of much more mature than I was at 13. And she recently, in her school, her grade school, she started with Calvin and Hobbes. Within a few years, she was reading, I don't know if you know the book Stitches by David Small, intense memoir, fantastic book, I highly recommend it. Point is, she did a report on it. Educator looked at it and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, this is a picture book. This is not a book." And my daughter was like, "No, she didn't." So, and the point is that that's where I come at, is feeling as though there's still a lot of education to be done. There's still, the work like this exceptional body of work needs to help further the cause, is what I feel. So that's my origin story. So before we get started, I believe any good narrative begins with an origin story. So I'd like to ask you guys, what are your origin stories, personally and professionally?
I guess my origin story, everybody I know who loves comics feels like I had a unfair head start because my parents really loved comics, and they were huge fans of all kinds of comics, especially the older newspaper comics, Little Nemo, the Kinder Kids, Pogo. My mother has a huge Little Lulu collection, all these old classic comics, and that's what I grew up reading, and that's what made me fall in love with comics. And then when I was in high school, I was introduced to, in junior high, I got really into manga, as many junior high kids do, and still love it to this day. And in high school, I got really into zines and mini comics and self-publishing, and that's my origin story.
I didn't read comics growing up. There wasn't a comic book shop in my town, so the only comics I read were newspaper comics, and I read them every day. And I didn't realize how much they were informing me. But when I set out in my career, I was just an illustrator, and I was working for a company that did museum display. We would do the murals behind the specimens, and then we would do the didactic rail in front. And one day, my boss said, "Hey, you can draw funny. Will you make a funny comic about carbon-14 dating?" And I said, okay. And the carbon atom was like a little Superman. Anyway, it was 4 pages long. And it is on display at the Kansas Science City Center, if you're ever in Kansas City. It might not be there anymore. But years later, at an illustration, I wrote picture books. Wrote and illustrated a series of picture books, and I ran into a Newbery author named Shannon Hale. We had the same last name. So I went up and said, "Hey, we have the same last name." And I gave her one of my books. And she said, "I want to do a graphic novel because I think that's going to be the next big thing. I would like to do Rapunzel, but as a Western." And she said, "Do you have any experience in comics?" And I said, "Oh, yeah. I've done comics." And it started from there. And I've got a taste for it. And I don't even want to do picture books anymore because comics are so much fun to create. So that's my weird origin story.
You can use the other mic right
Okay,
there.
sure. So I was one of those kids that was called a reluctant reader in Texas. And I wouldn't pick up a book for anything, but my uncle introduced me to Marvel comics at a young age, and that was pretty much all I read. But it was the art that attracted me, and that's why I started drawing at a very early age. And that was me. I was the artist in school growing up, and I ended up going to college for art. And I tried painting. I did some graphic design, and then eventually settled on illustration. And I thought I was going to get into more editorial illustration and things like that, and I did. When I moved to New York, I started doing op-ed pieces for the New York Times and magazines, newspapers, and I also started doing storyboarding, which is kind of like comics on speed for ad agencies, and something clicked. I thought about my childhood, and I said, I love comics. Maybe I should give it a shot again. And at that point, I had an agent, and he just dropped a job on me illustrating a graphic novel for Simon & Schuster about Babe Ruth, which I had no interest really in baseball, but I thought I'd give it a shot, and I did, and I really fell back in love with comics. And then I kind of pursued it a little bit more instead of doing the editorial stuff and the storyboards. And I ended up getting a grant to adapt, which is really odd, adapt a old Dutch novel for a museum as a comic book, because they were trying to get the collection out into the public a little more, and I liked that idea. And that they had the original. It was like you had to wear gloves and make an appointment to see the thing. So they hired me to basically make it more accessible to the public as a comic, and that got me thinking. I was like, I gotta maybe make my own story, something that I really care about deeply. And I looked at my family, my 5-year-old, my daughter. I was like, maybe I should write something about them. So I told my wife. She thought I was nuts. She said, how about your childhood stories? I mean, it was unique. I mean, my wife's from mainland China, and she grew up in the 70s, and I realized not many Americans knew about that time period in China. It was very close to the rest of the world. And her stories really, they're amazing to me. So I felt like I had to make them into a graphic novel. And we could talk about later what happened as far as being co-authors and things like that. But it worked out well. It was received well, and so that's my latest work.
Right, so Mark Siegel, I grew up in France, so I was kind of pickled in a different tradition of comics. And the time that I was there, comics here in America have had, there's been more of a stigma hanging on them for a long time of being not good for kids or not real books or this kind of thing. I didn't grow up with that. My grandmother, my French grandmother, who died last year, she was 107. I was very proud of her. She had a stack of Tintin books on her shelf that she got when she was in French Indochina in Vietnam in like 1932 and on, right? Some of those same books my mom read in the 1940s and 50s, and some of those same ones, plus the newer ones, I read in the 70s, right? And, you know, there would be regularly the big, like the equivalents of the Pulitzer Prize and all this would regularly go to comics authors. It was dubbed the ninth art in France. So it was recognized, and it was part of the kind of mainstream reading diet of a country with a lot of readers. So I came to the States for college, and I missed a certain kind of comic that was very hard to find here. This kind of literary author-driven comic, as opposed to superheroes, as opposed to other things. So that got me on a track of getting into publishing. Eventually, I think that impulse drove me to start First Second Books, which is this imprint I run as my day job, I guess. And we publish graphic novels in all age categories with a certain kind of sensibility, you know, and some Europeans, but it's homegrown American publishing with some really incredible talents, and that is going well. There's a lot happening with that. It's blossoming, you could say, and then alongside of this, I've had my own projects all along the way. So I had, for example, I would say my first 10 years in America were spent getting rejection letters from both sides of the Atlantic. You know, I was pitching projects for picture books and graphic novels, and just 10 years of getting no's in one form or another, to the point where I thought that was my lot in life. And then I got a break with Simon & Schuster. I got my first picture books. And the first picture book I did in a kind of European graphic style. And then later I did a book with my wife, Sienna, that was mentioned earlier, who's sitting right there. And not unlike Andrés, they're tales from her life, but in ballet. So it was a comic for girls, and that was another experiment. And then now I've got that's to dance. And then now Sailor Twain is a whole different creature, an adult story done in charcoal. So it took a while to get to the point where I feel like I am doing what I feel like I need to be doing.
Thank you. Well, you guys have touched on my next 80 questions. But I do want to follow up with that, because it's challenging enough to work with a partner just professionally and try to balance words and pictures, or how do you do that? But to do that with a significant other, to do that with a spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, that's, then it lives with you. Then it's in your home, and it can be a 24-hour thing. So I'm curious, since so many of you have worked on books with someone so close to you, what is that? What is the most gratifying thing about that? And what is the most frustrating? And at any point, did you think, we can't do this?
Let's see, where do I start? My wife thought her childhood stories weren't interesting enough to get them out there into the public, and I thought different. So that was the start. So I went about making kind of a short pitch, and then she was going along with it. I have to tell you as I was doing this, she was in her residency training to be a physician. So she didn't have a lot of time to be involved in my work. So I was, besides my advertising stuff, I was chipping away at this project, and every now and then I'd show her, and she'd be like, "Oh, that's sweet, yeah," and then eventually I got a publisher, and then her eyes lit up. She's like, "This is really going to happen," and then she started. I basically started interviewing her for the book, and she didn't really have time to sit down with me but I interviewed like if I was doing a biography, and I said, the next trip, because we already been going to China for a few years, at least once a year, visiting her family. And I said, this next trip is going to be tax write-off. She's like, what? And it's going to be research. I'm going to try to go out and meet your extended family, go out to your dad's village. I want to draw things, take photos. And she started really getting excited. She's like, this is really happening. And so seeing that was very exciting for me. But besides that, I knew her stories were strong. I knew they resonated to something bigger because it was a transition period, like a transitional generation between the Cultural Revolution and what we see China as today. And I really wanted to share that part with it. But through the child's eyes, I thought it was going to be really unique. So that's what I was excited about. And so it happened, and it got received well. And I actually went beyond our expectations. The Times did a review, New York Times, and then we got called into NPR to do a reading. And my wife was like starstruck. She's training to be a doctor. She's outside of this world completely. And she was my highlight of just seeing her with the earphones on and reading her childhood stories. I thought that was great. And to have so many people interested in that has been wonderful too. So.
Well, my husband is also a cartoonist. His name is Drew Wine, and he has a book called Set to Sea. And the book that we worked together on was our book Secret Science Alliance, which is technically my book. And the whole the whole time I was writing it, I need a lot of attention. So I was I'd draw a page and then I'd make Drew look at it, and I'd, thumb things out and do sketches and run ideas by and ask him all his opinion about all the plot points. And he was really right there throughout the entire thing. And I started feeling like, oh man, am I going to have to give him like co-author credit on this book? 'Cause he's really done a lot of work on it. And then the deadline was coming up. We had gotten all the sketches and basically the first draft approved, and we were going to go to final art, and I didn't have enough time to do it. And I was like, darling, could you ink my book? And he said yes. For folks who don't know much about comics, basically you do the pencils and then you ink them. And that's traditionally in American comics, as opposed to like French comics, that's often two separate jobs. You have professional pencilers and professional inkers. I had always done my own penciling and inking, but in this case I just didn't have the time, and Drew happens to be one of the best inkers in America, and he lives with me, so I was like, I'll just give this a try. And and it worked, and he inked it, and it's beautiful, and I'm very proud. And it's mostly working together is just a joy. It can get kind of stressful, but it's kind of a relief to work with someone that you can fight with, you know, because if you're working with someone who's just a friend, you can't really, you know, fight with them, you know, but if it's your partner, then you can really scrap it out and it's okay. It's fine. There's no like push down feelings or bad blood. And it's just one of the things that I hear every cartoonist talk about again and again is how painful it is, because comics take so much time and they're so quick to read. Even the most wonderful comics that are beloved are, you know, you can read them in a couple hours. And so you spent a year on a project that takes somebody an hour to read, and it's a little intense, but when you have a partner that you're working with, you know that there's one person at least who is as emotionally involved with this book as you, and they love it as much as you do, and the characters are just as real to them. So I think it was just a really positive experience.
Yeah.
If you guys haven't seen, if you haven't seen Secret Science Alliance, they've got it.
Awesome.
It is the best. And I met Eleanor today, and that is the book when they ask me if I visit schools and stuff, what are some other graphic novels? That's my go-to book right there. So good.
Yes, it's true. It's all true.
I don't see his name on the front.
I did a collaboration with someone I wasn't close to, and that was the author Shannon Hale. And she was already a well-loved, award-winning young adult author, but she'd never written a comic before. And we got together and pitched our idea to the publisher and worked really closely together, putting the pictures and the story all together and sending it off. And when the publisher accepted it, they said, great, stop communicating. We want everything to go through the editor. And I got that email, and then about 5 minutes later, I got an email from Shannon saying, are we going to do this? And, of course, we didn't. So don't tell anybody at Bloomsbury, but we went back and forth a million times behind their backs to work on it. And it is fun to work together with somebody because it's very collaborative. I can't imagine doing it without being able to talk to the author, the other person.
I mean, that is actually the norm in picture book publishing, is like this kind of triangular, keep people, it's like a territorial thing. I learned about this because as an editor, I don't do this. I don't. I really put people together. I also follow, you know, in Europe, some of the great stars in the comics world, they alternate between collaborative projects and solo projects, and they keep getting challenged and pushed out of their comfort zone. And so I encourage our authors at First Second to do that. And I really, you know, cut them loose, and it's like I don't stand between them. But it's true that that's often the norm. And my experience with the collaboration thing with Sienna was, you know, what was an amazing, I think one of the rewards from it was the sense of having, I didn't especially warm to ballet, and she didn't especially warm to comics. And we kind of had to get inside each other's language. And that journey is really what made that book, you know, and that was a kind of a unplanned experience, you know. And I think the other thing is a good project, you're not the same person as the person who started, right? On the other side of that project, you're a changed person. And when you're with somebody, and especially a partner and your life partner, and you're changing together through a project, that's a very profound thing.
And I will point out that it is Sienna's name hers is listed first, but his is higher. So I don't know if there was that was a compromise, but or the rhythm of the dance. But I will point out this is a beautiful book and very moving, and some Bolshoi prima ballerinas from the Bolshoi are recommending this. It's just beautiful. So,
I real quick, I just want to try to train myself to do more self-promotion stuff, but my next book is also a collaboration. It's called Kata of Samarkand, and it's a collaboration with my mom. And she's a history teacher, and we're writing it together.
Can you guys scrap it out?
We can a little, not quite as much as me and Drew, but it's definitely. And she's a very gentle person, and so it's interesting to see her get a little emotional. Like I sent her all the character designs after we'd been working on it for a while, and she wrote back. She was like, "Do you have to make them all so ugly?" She was like, I think people like comics when they like to look at the characters. And I was like, that was personality, Mom. I don't know.
Well, before I get into this, one thing I'll say is if I name drop, it's not that I'm best friends with these people. It's that I'm paid to interview people smarter than myself, and that's sort of a joy of my job is learning it. In about 3 weeks, I'll be quoting all of the panelists here randomly at different events. So, but what I do want to mention is not far from here. A couple of years ago, was talking with the Doonesbury creator Gary Trudeau about when he was a young man, early 20s, coming out of Yale, and trying to do political satire, trying to get newspaper editors, the point is the gatekeepers of that time, to take this strip that felt like something new. We'd had Pogo, we'd had Little Abner, but they were more couched, and they weren't launched as political strips and as strips representing a generation. Point is, Gary, he wasn't selling early on, and he was feeling down. And at Andrews McMeel, the syndicate, they said, it was either Andrews or McMeel said, don't worry, there's one truism about editors: they die. and Gary said, sure enough, within a few years, they started dying. Now, what he really means is retiring, but it was what he felt like he'd come across this stodgy editor. He also pointed out, now he's in his 60s, he said that was far funnier then than now. But but the lesson was, you can wait out the gatekeepers. So, we had, after Frederick Wertheim and Seduction of the Innocent in 1953, this period where, like, I interviewed Jerry Robinson and by email Joe Simon, who have both since died, Captain America and co-creator of the Joker, about what it was like trying to do superheroes when they died and transitioning to romance stories, and couldn't do horror stories. There's always gatekeepers in comics that you come up against. What's interesting now is the term graphic novel is it's a way to sell as much as, it's not one genre, but graphic novels seem to be both embraced by education and booksellers, and right now, I think the thing that's really coming up against obstacles. And 2 weeks ago at the Eisner Awards, when we were judging, there were two professors there, and both are making it their mission, one especially, to say that graphic novels are literature. And so I was curious with you guys, are you coming up against obstacles, gatekeepers, or are we to the point now where not so much?
Well, I have, this is again with my editorial hat on. I've been traveling around the country, and I've talked to hundreds of booksellers and thousands of librarians around the country, and I would say, in a way, the battle has been won, but not everybody has caught up to the fact. But it feels like the battle has been won, like, in terms of being able to say, now you have bookstores that are entirely dedicated just to children's comics. There's a few, and then that tells you that there's enough to stock a bookstore, a small bookstore, right? So that's kind of interesting. And then you can see the awards that have gone to comics, since 2005 and 6, and you go, okay, something has shifted here, and there's also the fact that right now in America, it's like a creative explosion, like has never ever happened before, of like incredible talent, people, writers and artists doing astonishing stuff, and these are some of them are great voices, and they're people that are going to be their work is going to stay, and it happens to be done in comics form, and that's kind of an amazing moment to be in right now. It's hard to see it when you're in it, but in hindsight, it's going to be like, this is what was happening now in America, and I think it's very inspiring.
I've run into a few librarians and teachers who are not big fans, but then they get that one reluctant reader that turns them around and gets that kid into the habit of reading and carrying around a book. They jump from a book with pictures into other books, but it's that habit builder of going around with a book. And I've noticed those little reluctant readers walking around with books melts the heart of all of the librarians and teachers who don't like comics. They have to go, well, kind of like comics.
I think that most people who say that they don't like comics because they're not real books, just don't actually like comics themselves, and so they don't understand why other people might like them. You know, comics aren't for everybody, and if you didn't grow up reading comics, sometimes it's kind of hard to understand what's going on, and there's too much going on the page. The people that I have run into that are a little bit not so cool with comics sound like me talking about video games, where I'm like, it's moving too fast, and what's going on, and it's too shiny. You know, it's just this. That's my opinion.
Do you guys do school visits? A little bit. I found it interesting. I mean, I started doing school visits recently, and I knew they were pretty much a few years ago exclusive to children's book authors, and now a lot of graphic novelists are being asked to come in. I think technology has something to do with that. I don't know how you guys present your books, but I kind of do a little PowerPoint thing so I can get the kids to read the comic on a big screen. It works out really well. So I don't know about 5 years ago how it would work, with all the little panels and reading to children. But now, I mean, we have LCD projectors and it works. The kids love it. I mean, at least in my experience, they really get into it. So I think for me, that seems to be an important point, that we can actually go visit youngsters in the school and present our books like kind of in a grandiose way, so I like that.
One thing I'll say is, with kids, like I know with my daughter, it's seamless going from a comic strip to a graphic novel, establishing a comics literacy. Last year I was talking with Chris Ware, who did Building Stories, which is right up here, and he believes that even with young brains by 13, 14, 15, we start learning the imposed structure and paths of thinking. And so part of what you have is, I think, you have young readers who they're fluent in comics literacy just because it's like growing up with your native language. And I think part of the issue is you come up against, it's not just a prejudice, it's learning how to read comics, learning how to read graphic novels, and and the strengths. The late great political cartoonist Doug Marlette used to say he thought comics there's a primal quality that they bypass our filters. That even when we're reading prose, the critical lens is up, or the critical filter, and there's a power to that. So I'm curious with you guys, do you see, in terms of comics literacy in this country, and if you want to speak to France, Belgium, Japan, where it's culture-wide, this literacy, can you speak to what you experience on that front?
I didn't grow up reading a lot of comic books, just the newspaper comics. I got into comics late. I went to school in Seattle, Washington at Cornish, and it was right next to Fantagraphics, the great publisher that was really putting out lots of cool stuff at the time. So I got into reading graphic novels and comics when I was about 19 or 20. And I wasn't good at it at the beginning. I was a reader. I liked reading novels. I liked getting those chapters and just burning through page after page after page. And when it finally clicked for me, comics literacy, is when I discovered that reading a good graphic novel is a lot more like watching a movie with subtitles than reading a novel. And that's when the switches kind of clicked, and I can do it. But I still take it slow. I like to take it slow. I like to look at all the pictures and slow. I'll read a few pages. It's strong stuff. Got to put it away. It's not like a novel that I can burn through. But it's funny how you automatically start learning it. And then I had to do it all again when I started reading the Japanese-style graphic novels because they're all backwards. But it makes, to me, I don't understand the reluctant readers who start with graphic novels, because to me it's harder. I think you're using more brain processes when you read a graphic novel than when you're just reading a novel. When you get in that novel groove, you can just go forward. But in a graphic novel, it's a little ping pong match going on in your brain back and forth.
Well, my wife's a doctor, and I asked her when I speak to you, she was like, I see words when you talk to me in my head, and I see pictures. And when I was a young boy, that's how I saw life as comics almost. So it was easy for me to pick up a comic. I mean, I started drawing so early, and it was just something natural for me. And the words came second, but they came out eventually. And but personally speaking, to how I read comics, it was a little different than you. I was like, came from the visual side, the pictures first, and then the words came. So.
Also, people who are, I think people who've grown up with only the prose reading, it does actually work on different circuitry in your brain. It's like it's a different experience, and it's good at certain things, and not as good at other things. You know, so some things a novel can do that you can't do so well in a comic book, but the reverse is true. And you do the thing about people who've read prose and who are uncomfortable with comics and graphic novels. Oftentimes, you'll see them and they kind of open one. They go like, I can't. I don't get it. It's just not. And what happens is they're actually going too fast. And it's actually the first step if you want to kind of teach somebody to appreciate a graphic novel is that you actually do need to slow down your reading, because they tend to just read the words, you know. And you actually, in comics, I mean, it sounds so obvious to say, but you read the words and you read the pictures and you allow the alchemy to happen between the two. And there's this kind of a third thing that runs through it, and that's the reading, you know. I love it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Recently on Facebook, Tim Page, some of you may know the name, he was a classical music critic at the Post, Pulitzer winner, and he'd written a long piece too about having Asperger's, and he's very interested in brain function, and the guy's, you know, brilliant musically. And on Facebook he said, when I read a novel prose, I don't see pictures. Does anyone else experience that? And I think the Facebook thread comments went on for 300-400 comments, and as I said, I can't read without seeing pictures. I need that, you know, I need that to see that. So I think what's interesting is, you know, educators, I think, are realizing this, you know, that if you can light that match, you know, you can get it going, the reluctant reader thing. One thing I'm interested about is there seems to be an explosion, for one thing, as we see in the youth market. I was talking to Raina Telgemeier. I don't know if you know her work in drama and Smile. She was for Drama, which is a graphic novel about kids, you know, drama kids in grade school. She was going to set this in high school, and her editor said, no, we need middle school. And it was like, you know, this is the sweet spot. This is where we can sell. Now, I know you guys have written for different ages, adults, you know, children in between, you know, adolescents. And as my daughter says, adolescents don't like to be talked down to. They would rather have you write above them and let you know, them reach. I'm curious, what are your experiences with, you know, and you're an editor as well, Mark. Where's the sweet spot, or is it such an explosion that it's wide open for what you do?
You mean in age categories,
Yes,
right?
in age categories.
Well, on the editorial side, you know, I wanted for a second to have every season we would have something for young readers, something for teens, and something for adults, and we did, and I stuck to it, and I had to fight for that, you know, because our first successes came in the teen category. So then the pressure was like, you know, ever so subtly pushing me to just get the teen stuff, you know, and stick to what works, and then eventually we got, you know, a few New York Times bestsellers in all three categories. This year was the first year we actually scored in all three age categories at the same time. So now there's kind of freedom of movement, but you know, it's a weird thing because I think, you know, you do need to sell a graphic novel into an age category. Yeah. That's just the way the business works. But graphic novels themselves, maybe more than any other kind of format, they blur those age categories like crazy, you know. And it's like, I mean, Secret Science Alliance, we're like all the First Second gang we're all rabid fans of it, like not for our kids, but like for ourselves, you know, and our kids.
Yeah, I definitely think that for one of the most wonderful things about comics is that it's so easy for kids to gain a lot of confidence in, because they can pretty consistently read above their age level if they're reading a comic, because they can look at the picture and figure out kind of what's going on, and then from seeing the picture kind of, you know, figure out a couple words that they know in the word bubble, and then maybe the words that they don't know, they can guess or they can ask. And so it's just a lot more open to the younger kids to that they can maybe approach some. So I get very little kids reading Secret Science Alliance that I'm like, oh, you don't understand half of those words, but they still get a lot of pleasure out of it. And with my book Stinky, which is for younger kids, I get older students reading that and really enjoying it, just because comics are inherently enjoyable. And that whole, I've heard the publisher of Stinky, Toon Books, run by Françoise Mouly, she just is really passionate about the potential for comics as a literacy tool, because kids just love them so much, and all the Toon Books are aimed at younger readers, but we've heard tons of good stuff from older readers as well that just, read whatever comics they can get a hold of.
Any more thoughts on that? What about writing? One thing my daughter said, she's offended if she's being she feels an author is trying to sell Pink and Purple to her, or if she feels like, where's the action, as if authors are trying to write to a stereotype. And it's one reason why she likes Adventure Time, the TV show, but the comic books, because it feels like you have Pink and Purple princesses almost ironically, but you've got adventure. And I was curious, do you, as authors, as artists, are you cognizant of that? Are you urged in terms of markets? Just what about writing for gender or not writing for gender? Is that, especially for writing for young people, is that an issue or not at all?
I'm probably not a super good example of this, because I've always been, I think one of the reasons why I back when I started reading comics, it was kind of a bit more of a boys' club. But I've always been pretty comfortable with that, because I was kind of a tomboy, and not too into the Pink and Purple thing. But a lot of girls really dig that, and I think that's one of the things that's been really fun about the manga boom, is that just there was so long that people were like, girls don't like comics, girls don't like comics. There's something about girls that makes them hate comics. It's just the way their brains work. And of course it was just that the comics available in the US were not at all girl friendly. And now there are just so many fun titles for girls out there, and Pink and Purple type stuff, but also just adventure stuff for girls, or stuff that's equally fun for both genders. And you've just seen an explosion of girls reading comics, and it's so exciting. It just makes me so happy.
Another reason I wanted to write Little White Duck with my wife was she's an exceptional person. She immigrated here from China to do cancer research on her own, and all her family's back in China, and she taught herself how to drive in Texas, at the age of 22. And the highways are crazy there. If you guys ever been there, you have to be very brave. And she got really involved in American culture. She started taking dance lessons on her own to learn ballroom dancing. I mean, she's an amazing woman, and she's continuing her education to be an MD. So she's a very strong woman. I wanted to capture that and put it into the book, even though the main character, which is her at a young age, I wanted to have that character resonate through the book, her personality. And I did want to make a role model for young girls that would pick up the book. I did it consciously. And so I even talked about that with my wife. And since we do have a daughter, it was easy to make that, decision. Just going back to the last question a little bit, another thing that I really didn't have an age group in mind, but it was going to be from a child's point of view, I thought, because there was some heavy political things going on in the 70s in China. And I felt to really get it across to a wider audience, I had to put it through a child's eyes, through my wife's eyes, and it seemed to work. I mean, there's things like famine, politics, things like that, but once you put it through her eyes, it's accessible to many ages. And since it does go into a bit about mythology of China, I wanted to carry a lot of ages through. Like somebody that could possibly, an early reader, would just be into the pictures, the beautiful pictures. And then their parents could just kind of read things with them, and then they could grow, into junior high school and high school, and eventually start understanding a little bit about the politics in China at that time, and see how the main character lives her life through it. So a lot of it was conscious, but I didn't have any. I'm learning about the markets and how maybe an editor might think, and they're very specific, like 9 to 12-year-old girls that live in Minnesota with pigtails and freckles, but I wasn't quite thinking that narrow, and I've heard maybe in like France, I've heard their age groups are a little wider, possibly.
It's different, yeah.
Well, they lived to 107, so it's.
When I wrote the Hazardous Tales books, I didn't set out to write them for girls or boys, but the publisher knew, and I kind of knew, that this was going to be a kind of a boy-centric thing. There's explosions on the cover that's about American soldiers doing cool things in American history, and what I've discovered in visiting schools and stuff is that it really has no gender boundary because kids like them a lot, but I've noticed that they like different things. If there's something really morbid or gross, the girls want to know about it. I've only been discovering this. I started keeping a tally. My next book in the series is about the Donner Party, and I talk about this in my school visit, and the boys just kind of look up and they're kind of glazed over, but every girl's hand shoots straight up. They want to know the gross stuff, and they want to know what happens. So I can't predict it. I don't know who's going to like what, but girls are morbid. That I've learned. Little girls.
Will there be recipes with that? Because they might want an ebook.
But it's good to remember, I think there's the vision behind a book, then there's the publishing and the marketing, and sometimes the dance between the two is there's always somebody getting their toes stepped on in that dance, because it's just like art and commerce just play by totally different rules, and you do have to answer to the art ultimately. And what's funny with the commerce side, and the editor kind of has to have one foot in each world and kind of interface between the two. And you get from sales and marketing, you get sometimes very strong pressure. It says, no, that absolutely can't work, and they always sound like they really know what they're talking about, and nobody really does. When I remember back when I was at Simon & Schuster, it was like white picture books. Never, ever, ever have too much white on a picture book cover. Then Olivia comes along, and everybody should have white on their picture books. And it's the same people sometimes who are like, and so take it all with a grain of salt.
I'm sure almost everyone here knows of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and and maybe for sale later, you can find them, and maybe Big Nate, maybe yes, but I don't know if you know the backstory. Some of you may know is that Jeff Kinney went to the University of Maryland here, grew up in Columbia, and 20-some years ago, he would see Big Nate by Lincoln Pierce in his newspaper, comic strip, and he loved it, and he wrote Lincoln, and Lincoln was smart enough to write back and give tips, and they developed a friendship, but it was just real casual. It was a very low-key mentorship. So a few years ago, lo and behold, at a New York comic convention, Jeff Kinney's there. The last day, someone comes by his stand. They see what he's 36 and nothing's taking. And all of a sudden, an editor gets it. The rest for him is history. But then when he was grateful enough, he went back and he runs a website, Pop Tropica. And what he went back to Lincoln, and Lincoln's quick story is 20 years ago, Lincoln, his comic strip launch sold well. It turned out the salesman who died right in the middle of the sale had made all these phony sales to get a bonus. Lincoln's wiped out. So Lincoln struggled for almost 20 years. Jeff comes back to his mentor and says, I want to put you on this website, Pop Tropica. Within two days, millions of hits. Big Nate crosses over. It's digital. It's in bookstores. It's huge. All this is a long way of saying we're at a point technologically where that crossover is possible and encouraged, and we have young readers who can discover things through many portals. I'm just curious, can you speak digitally, technologically, where, what have you experienced with your works, and what do you think online is a component of what you do?
I I pray every day that my young readers don't find my online stuff because I do a lot of work for adults as well. It's not like anything bad, but maybe there's some boobs and stuff, you know. And I haven't gotten any angry letters from parents yet. So all my young fans, don't look me up online. All right.
That is www.
That goes for me too. I did some illustrations for an adult show called Dexter with serial killers and like
The Showtime show?
yeah, and it's even more graphic than the show. So just don't Google my name. Actually, just go to my website that I've filtered all that advertising, TV show stuff out. And so that's I think that's the thing with digital stuff. It's just all there, you know. So and I just kind of started in the game of graphic novels, so I'm kind of building that. And my next project's a traditional children's book through Penguin. So hopefully, the more I get into that vein, hopefully Dexter will just go away, you know.
Dexter never leaves.
Dexter bought us a car, so I cannot complain. It's a Dexter mobile, but you know.
You can look at my site online. It's 100% squeaky clean. It's awesome. It's for teachers. Every week I put up a This Week in History type of comic. You can connect to it from the Hazardous Tales blog. I'm just kidding. I was so cutting edge on top of the internet scheme for about 4 months in 2008 to 2009. And then I've kind of fallen behind. So I basically run an online blog sketchbook where I just post some sort of comic every 5 days a week. I have 200 followers. Many of them are friends and family. But what I've been able to do with it is it keeps me exercising. It keeps me building and creating stories. And then I'll take the stories once I've finished them online and I'll bundle them up and I'll ship them off to publishers. And my Hazardous Tales series was born from a short, goofy comic about Lewis and Clark. So I don't think I reach anybody directly on the internet. You know, my cousin, she says nice things in the comments. But it's been a great place to exercise and get things ready to publish. I love the traditional publishing format where you send it to the gatekeepers, they clean it up real nice, and then a great bookstore like this sells it to people and you take a book home. The internet's fun and good, but boy, I love that finished book, that paper, and you flip through it, it's great. What were we even talking about?
I actually have a huge, I do a lot of stuff online, and let me tell you, it's the squeaky cleanness that's giving you problems. Because my stuff, not squeaky clean, tons of followers.
I sense a collaboration. Can I just say with Mark has plenty of mermaid boobs in this, so you don't even have to go online, and it's beautifully rendered, by the way. Yeah.
Well, so what I did with that, and it's interesting, I didn't realize, you know, we share the kind of needing to have a wall between our different careers, and I have my picture books, and Sailor Twain is not there, you know, and I've had to warn some of the children's librarians and things, but it's adult. It's an adult story, and it's, you know, it's a captain on a steamboat in 1887, and it's what we would today call a midlife crisis, but it's got some supernatural problems attached, and but what I did was I put it online, and this was a kind of, I don't even remember how it started, but it was an idea of just like the old-fashioned 19th century serial, you know, and people used to come to the docks, right? We hear about, you know, Dickens, Great Expectations. People would flock to see the boats arrive to get the first copy of the next chapter, right? And so and in America, yes, Dickens, and I mean, but Melville and Mark Twain, of course, and, you know, all the great, there was a whole generation, started with Harriet Beecher Stowe. That was actually the first huge mega bestseller in America because she serialized it. So I thought the book was kind of playing in that tradition and in that time period. So I thought, okay, I'll try it. But I really had no idea if anybody would come along. It's a slow building start. It's like about 5 chapters before you even find out for sure there is a mermaid in the story. It's like these interwoven love stories, you know, so it's like a bit 19th century plotty. typically the kinds of books that more women read than men. And I thought maybe I'll try this for 3 months, and I'll put it up one page every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Plus, they're done in charcoal, so it's like it doesn't really look like a regular comic. And I thought, I'll give it a try, and maybe drop it. And then what turned out was people did come along for the ride, and a community built up around the project. And typically, this is a project. All told, I worked on it for 9 years, so it's been like a chunk of my life. And normally on a long haul project, there's certain kinds of neuroses that hit authors, from the loneliness, the sheer solitude of those projects. And what happened was 3 times a week I was being received. And it was discussed, and people were staying in the story. Or if they popped out of the story, I was like, oh, something's not working with that scene. There's like something off. Or, but I would get, and it wouldn't influence the story because I held the reins on the story, but it did help with some of my research. I thought I'd done my homework, but then like one day, the first time we go into the captain's cabin, a comment that day was like, hey, those planks are way too wide. I mean, on an 1880s Hudson River steamboat, narrow planks, cypress or teak wood only. That in case of water damage, you can never replace those. Okay, and I fixed it. So and I thank them for the help on the research. But so there's like the interactive thing is very new in a way. It's different than letters to the reader in the back of the comic. It's like immediate. And that was pretty thrilling. And it was like it gathered about 800,000 unique readers. And they don't all buy the book. I know that, but it's an incredible thing, and because of it, a lot of other things happened. Exhibits happened at the New York Public Library, and then the whole connection to the Hudson Valley, because it's a bit of a love letter to the Hudson River, and so suddenly there was like the Great Hudson.
Which is where you live now, right?
Yes. Yeah. And there's like a Hudson winery that put out 2 Sailor Twain wines. There's a jeweler who made the Sailor Twain jewelry. There's like stuff that happened because of being online that if I had just kind of chucked the finished book, but that's always what it was going to be, but it was but opening that process in that way was a very rich experience.
And I thought this cover being made out of teak wood was a great touch too. That touches, speaking of neuroses, which can go along so long with creating things. I'm curious, because I remember once I was speaking to a class and I'd drawn something and I thought I was being very serious, and so I read this to this class, and then I took questions, and the first kid raised his hand and he just looked at me and goes, "You're funny." And I realized no matter that there's certain things that inherently we just naturally, our natural voice, the natural way we draw, and I'm curious, along the way, have there been either specific adults or children who have said, are there memorable things like that you have heard that made you realize things about yourself as a creator, as an artist?
Oh, this is the worst. There's an internet review. It came out just a few months ago. I don't even usually read internet reviews, but people love Rapunzel's Revenge. They think it's a great book. Every once in a blue moon, somebody just doesn't like it. And somebody praised the story up and down. They said, this is so great, but let's talk about the artwork. This is wobbly, and the artist suffers from same face syndrome. Ooh. This was a thing I've never heard before, same face syndrome. So now it keeps me up at night. Am I drawing the same face again and again? So that's all I have to add.
That put the revenge in.
Yeah, you guys know Goodreads? Oh my God, that's like killer for us. I don't look at that anymore. I mean, everything luckily, it's been positive, but I started realizing I check it like constantly, and then I just stopped. I just had to stop. So that's one thing about being online and getting feedback that's scary. But connect more to your question, I started teaching comics in college. So it's hard not to influence your students too much. And I do have to present what I do, kind of at the beginning of the class. But it's interesting. I mean, they view me as an illustrator, also as a teacher. So it's different interaction, I guess, between just being an illustrator outside of the academic kind of world. So it's been fun. I really enjoy teaching the college courses that I've been teaching recently.
There was one. This one wasn't my own story, but we put out. I had the last video game I had played was the original Prince of Persia, like on an Apple II, eons ago. And when I started for a second, I got in touch with the creator of the Prince of Persia games, Jordan Mechner, and I asked him, like, can we do a graphic novel together? But not with the movie that was about to come out and everything else. So we did, and it was this crazy, completely uncommercial labor of love. We actually found a writer for it who was an actual Persian prince, an Iranian royal. And the worst thing about that? I mean, he's a really brilliant guy, a poet and everything, but his family takes it very seriously, and he was not allowed to use his real name, so we couldn't say that on the flap copy or in the marketing or anywhere. We could not say that this guy was our Prince of Persia was written by a Persian prince. And he did this crazy layered, beautiful, visionary thing. And then the artists, Luyên Pham, actually, who's a famous children's picture book illustrator, she and her husband, they're both from DreamWorks animation background, and they just did this amazing, I think, a very beautiful book, full of it's very spirited, and it's also fun, but it's layered. Our prince gave them access to his family's archive, and they had reference for all like ancient Iran and like every building, every weapon, every costume. Anyway, this work of art, and we put it out, and of course, we put the word out in the gaming world, and it tanked. And I remember looking like eagerly, looking through the comments, and the first comment I ever saw on a gaming site was, "Oh man, I picked up the Prince of Persia. The art sucks. It looks hand drawn." And it's not quite to your question.
That's a dagger these days, right? Did you want to add anything? Nothing from.
She's that good.
Yeah, she is. She really is. Nothing from Mom will have something soon, right?
Mine are all too painful. I don't want to share them. Sorry.
Well, thank you. It's time to open it up to the floor for questions.